minute session broken down into 3 parts. I'll start with an introduction as to what a local nature recovery strategy is. Now, for any of you that have been involved in the development process to date, a lot of this will be familiar, and I apologise for repetition, but I know that we do have a few new faces on the briefing this morning, so I wanted to make sure that everyone was fully up to speed as to what it is that we've been trying to achieve over the past 12 months. I'll then go into the actual detail of what the strategy itself is proposing, and then we'll finish up at the end with a session on how we understand it, at least how the local nature recovery strategy will be used to inform nature recovery. And I'll use that as an opportunity also just to show you a few mechanisms by which you can use the online mapping to understand how the local nature recovery strategy might influence or suggest action near you or even on your own land. Please don't use the chat as that's not going to be monitored. Any questions, please pop them in the Slido, which is in the chat function now. And we will circulate a copy of the presentation afterwards, so don't worry about scribbling everything down, and we'll also circulate a recording of the session too, so that you can share it with any colleagues who may also be interested. So I think that's all the housekeeping done. I will now kickstart into the presentation itself. So first of all, a bit of a scene setter in terms of why it is that we find ourselves needing local nature recovery strategies. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the State of Nature report from a couple of years ago, which painted a pretty dire picture in terms of the state of the UK's nature. It showed that species abundance had declined by average of 19% in the past 50 years, and that 1 in 6 of our species were threatened with extinction. And of the species assessed since the assessment began, 151 of those species had actually already been lost to the country. And perhaps associated with it, or certainly a determining and influencing factor, is the fact that only 1 in 7 of our most important habitats for wildlife were found to be in good condition. And therefore, we come to the picture that the UK is currently classified as one of the world's most depleted, nature depleted countries. And you know, I don't think that is surprising when you see the breakdown of these statistics. And unfortunately, that picture is no different at the local level in our own county, and is very much reflected. Our own State of Nature report in 2022 found that 10% of our assessed species are threatened with extinction, and over 30% of our sites of special scientific interest were found to be not in favourable condition. And when you consider that these are the areas in the county that are home to our most rare and endangered species and should represent our best wildlife and geological sites, it is perhaps not surprising that we have such a stark number of species at risk of extinction. And no doubt attributed to it is the fact that we also have just a general decline in the area of land that is under conservation management. I'm sure no one will be surprised to hear that the majority of our rivers and lakes and also coastal waters are not meeting good ecological status, and that's received quite a lot of press attention in the past 12 months or so. And also the fact that in Kent we have a growing population, and that population will need housing, it will need infrastructure. But responding to that growing population means that concerns such as habitat fragmentation and loss and the increase in pollution levels, all of these impacts on nature are unlikely to change without significant intervention. And I'm sure all of you would not want to see the loss of nature for nature's sake, but also there's the fact that we can't lose our natural environment. We can't have our natural environment degraded because we rely on ecosystem services. So even if we weren't going to recover nature for its own sake, we certainly would need to for ours. Ecosystem services provide us with a number of services. They provide us, for example, with food and drink, with water, and the materials that we build with. They also provide regulating services and allow us to have clean air. It stores carbon and also provides pollinating services, which I'm sure many of you are very aware of the importance of. Ecosystem services also support the healthy soils and nutrient cycling that, again, a lot of our growing industries rely on. And further to this, ecosystem services also provide cultural benefits. They provide us with the opportunities for physical health and well-being improvements, and also provide tourism and recreation too. And of course, across all of these services, there's an economic association, not just in terms of the raw materials that nature provides, but also the services that it supports in terms of pollination stuff, but also the ecosystem services themselves in terms of flood management, carbon storage, clean air. These are all things that we would have to find a man-made solution to if it wasn't for the fact that nature helps us out. So in response to the fact that we have this decline in nature, we have what is being called a climate and ecological emergency. In 2022, the government published legally binding targets to protect our environment, to clean up our air and rivers, and to boost nature. And these legally binding commitments pledge to end the decline of nature and also to support nature's recovery. And recognising that any recovery of nature would need local, targeted and coordinated and collaborative action, the Environment Act in 2021 set in place for the development of local nature recovery strategies. And that's what brings us here today. So as I said, a local nature recovery strategy comes as a result of the 2021 Environment Act. And there'll be 48 of these created across the whole of England with no gaps or overlaps. So if you think of each local nature recovery strategy as a piece of jigsaw, these all fit together seamlessly and provide complete coverage across the whole of England. And to ensure that they can join up at those boundary edges, all of the strategies are led by regulations and statutory guidance, and every responsible authority has been provided with a grant to develop the strategy itself. They are designed at the landscape scale, and locally they're developed by an appointed responsible authority, which for this case was Kent County Council, working for both the administrative boundaries of Kent and Medway. And although they are developed by Kent County Council or by responsible authorities, they are not our strategy. They are a strategy that's prepared on behalf of DEFRA to provide that local context that's needed for the nature recovery network that DEFRA have committed to deliver. And also importantly, they were to be collaboratively developed. There was a real drive from DEFRA to make sure that from the very outset, these were strategies that were developed with the input of stakeholders, as opposed to how strategies are quite often developed, which is a small group of people will go away in a sense in a dark room and create a strategy that you wouldn't see until this point at public consultation. But there was a real push and correct push from DEFRA to make sure that stakeholders were involved from the very get-go. And the intention is that all of these 48 strategies will agree and provide the local context that collectively will deliver a nature recovery network for England and work to that commitment to end the decline of nature and support its recovery. So in Kent and Medway, we set about to develop a local nature recovery strategy that would provide a set of agreed priorities for nature recovery and associated actions that would deliver on those priorities. And that we would have a shared vision for what that nature recovery would look like, a shared vision to what we would be working towards. And we would also really push for the use of nature-based solutions amongst that and really put focus on how we can maximise these within the county. By working together, we would have or develop a framework for joined up action, and we would begin to establish and build on the many already in place relationships that will be required. And because the strategy would be developed with those that will be instrumental in its delivery, the strategy itself would be ambitious, but also realistic and deliverable. And as well as it being deliverable from the point of view that it's developed with those who will understand the difficulties of delivery. The strategy itself is also linked to a number of mechanisms that will support it, both in terms of planning and funding, and I'll come to that later in the presentation. And finally, this strategy would not just be about words, it would spatially frame the strategy by mapping and focusing action to where it's most needed and where it will deliver the greatest benefits for nature. So I think it's quite important to pause here and just understand what this means and what the strategy will and won't do. And this is how DEFRA has designed the strategy and how DEFRA wants to see the strategy acting. So whilst the strategy will identify areas where action is likely to provide the greatest gains, the boundaries it draws will not be detailed, nor will they be definitive. And it will also not dictate nor instruct any actions. So those actions that have been identified and where they've been identified are not dictated and they're not instructed. They're simply potential measures that could be taken to support the recovery of nature. And as a result, landowners and managers will not be forced to make changes to the way they use or manage the land or their operations, but that action will be incentivised by linking the delivery of the strategy and its priorities to a range of government grants and funding, and also other sort of private investment and funding bodies. And like I said, I will come to this in a bit more detail later on. I'll also touch on later the fact that it will not offer statutory protection to land, nor will it prevent development from happening, but it will have a role in informing local plans in terms of land use planning, and it will also have a role in development management because there is a directing role for it in relation to biodiversity net gain. And this isn't the end of it. So obviously, a lot of work has gone in to getting us to this point, but really the real work begins hopefully in the summer when we publish the strategy. And then also on top of that, the strategy will not stay static. It will be reviewed, revised and republished on a regular cycle as instructed by the Secretary of State. And that will happen every 3 to 10 years. So obviously this won't happen straight away, but what we are looking to that the strategy will eventually provide within the county is that action and investment will be directed to areas of greatest need and benefit. And the thing that will likely come at a later stage is that losses and impacts will be directed away from our most valuable assets. In undertaking the development of the strategy, we followed a number of principles to make sure that it really was a robust and well-considered strategy. First of all, we made sure that in any priority or action we were developing, that the landscape character, the catchment functions and the ecosystem links across the county were fully considered to make sure that we maintained the ecological functionality and integrity of our landscape and the services it already provides. We didn't want to see the loss of anything as a result of the priorities and potential measures that were being put in place. We also wanted to focus on the most significant impacts arising from pressures and challenges facing nature. Now, the very nature of the strategy means that we can't necessarily address or change the pressures and challenges that our nature faces. But one of the things we can do is help to mitigate, minimise and manage the impacts from these. And that's what we've aimed to do within the strategy priorities and the potential measures that are associated with that. We also wanted to target our efforts to the most significant important habitats, and that applies not just nationally because we might hold a particular large proportion of that habitat nationally, but also looking at it locally as well, whether that would be that area of land that's particularly significant nationally, but also an area of land that perhaps a habitat that we have very little of, and we want to make sure that that habitat is in the best condition, the best state it can be, and if possible can be extended and expanded. We wouldn't just look to concentrate on the habitats that were threatened, we also looked at habitats that were degraded in quality and also those that were a risk from a changing climate. And alongside all the habitat considerations, we also wanted to make sure that the needs of threatened species were also considered, and making sure that the interventions that exist between habitats and species and the codependency really were thought about during the development of the strategy. Looking at a bit of a higher strategic level, we also wanted to support both local and national priorities and ambitions. And these weren't just those for nature, but also looking at how we might support wider benefits that might be the focus of a green or blue infrastructure strategy, for example, or other wider environmental targets that relate perhaps to carbon capture and air quality and water quality. So we were looking for opportunities whereby nature-based solutions could offer the opportunity to support those ambitions too. where we were identifying actions and the delivery mechanisms needed to achieve these priorities, we wanted to make sure that these were targeted to the areas of the county that were in most need and of wide benefits. And as we'll come to later when I talk about the actual outcomes of the strategy, of course, so many of the county needs action and needs investment. But the whole purpose of the strategy was to really focus this to where it was most needed. And that is why we've had to drill down in certain areas to really focus where that work needs to be targeted. And finally, across all the work that we were doing, we wanted to maximise the opportunities for delivering nature-based solutions. And this wasn't just in terms of making the most of the opportunities that nature presents, but the fact is that there is limited resources to invest into nature recovery. And if we could deliver nature-based solutions alongside nature recovery, then that might open up other funding, grants and investment pots that perhaps wouldn't be available to nature recovery, but might be available for instance, floodwater management. And then alongside that, we could also be delivering a nature recovery action. Sitting across all of this was a principle that we wanted to really embed into it, which was participatory development. So I said this was a requirement of the regulations, but we really went wholeheartedly into it and wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to get involved had the opportunity to be involved right from the very start. And it was a genuine involvement we wanted, not just sort of a tick box exercise to say we had people, we spoke to people. And the reason for this is because by involving the widest number of people, we would be ensured that the strategy would be based on the most up-to-date data and evidence. It would be developed with the input of the many experts that we have throughout the county. It would be informed with those with the local knowledge and the practical experience that was so important. Sorry, could we please turn our microphone off? Thank you. So it would allow us to ensure that the strategy was formed by those with the local knowledge and practical experience. You know, when you're developing something at a strategic level, it's really important to have that on the ground knowledge fed into the work. And finally, because this does have the potential to influence funding and investment and where action might take place, it was really important that the whole process was completely transparent so people could really trust what was being developed and what was being proposed when the strategy was published. And we were blown away by the response, by the call to get involved, with over 1,000 people engaged. And this 1,000 is only just the numbers that we counted when we actually think about all the other events and meetings and the like that we attended and got feedback from and input from people. We're likely to really be doubling that. So it's a really phenomenal amount of input. And it wasn't just the numbers. We had people from across all sectors participating in the strategy development workshops. And I'm really pleased to say that farming and land management were in our top 3 of sectors represented. So really fabulous turnout from that group. And also it wasn't just sectors, but also just a huge range of different businesses, organisations and bodies represented from across. So when I feel that we can say with pretty good confidence that the strategy really is representative of the thoughts and the desires or ambitions of the many different sectors and stakeholders that are impacted or affected or interested in the strategy in one way or another. And in addition to that stakeholder input, we also had input via the board and delivery group. We had a local planning authorities group that guided the work in terms of ensuring that it was linking up and would work within the local planning system. We had dedicated advisors from our government agencies, and we also had a range of technical advisory groups helping us on the mapping work, identifying our priority species. We had a fabulous network of land managers and land use professionals to support us, make sure that we could connect out to that sector and advise us on the work we were trying to do. And also we had some experts helping us in terms of freshwater and coastal habitats and helping us just look at the complexity that these habitats sometimes have in terms of interactions. And we also had some brilliant support in terms of our communications work. And owing to this exceptional amount of input, whenever I use the word we in terms of what the strategy is proposing, I really do mean the country. that's the county rather. That really is, you know, I really do feel that this is a strategy that represents what our stakeholders have told us they want to see for nature recovery, and how they have suggested we deliver on that. And I think it's also sort of useful to just remember at this point that this strategy is not county council. It is a strategy that is prepared on behalf of the county for DEFRA, and is effectively a DEFRA strategy in that regard. And just a quick, before I finish up this first section, a quick but massive thanks to everyone that contributed so much time, expertise and support throughout the process. And like I said, we really did have fabulous support. Alexa had wonderful support from all of the farming, producing, growing, land management, land advice, all of these different sectors that relate to that broader sector. And we're very, very grateful for all of that input and support. So thank you. So I will pause there and just see if there are any questions in respect of what the local nature recovery strategy is trying to do generally in terms of the legislation and the process by which we developed it.
There's nothing on the Slido, Liz, but if anyone would like to put their hand up with any questions.
Anything?
Nope, nothing so far.
Okay, great. I will crack on then. So the second part of the presentation is to introduce you to what the strategy is proposing for nature recovery in Kent and Medway. And the strategy is divided into 2 documents plus the online maps. The first part of the strategy essentially sets the context and provides a justification for what we are prioritising for nature recovery in the county and the action that it proposes. So this sets out what we have in the county, what makes our nature so special, looks at how our landscape has changed, the species and habitat changes, and the pressures, threats and challenges that we are essentially trying to address as part of the strategy. Also sets out the national and local strategic context that we set this strategy in, and also summarises the opportunities for nature recovery within the county. So I'm going to go on the basis that I think probably most people on the call today will have a reasonable understanding as to what makes our county so special. And I will leave it you to in your own time to read that section and see how we've set that out and why we think everything that's there. So what I want to do is really focus on part 2, which is essentially the real nuts and bolts of the strategy. So part 2 of the strategy basically sets out and the key legal requirements, the things we had to produce for the strategy. So these were the principles and vision, the priorities, the potential measures, the mapping of those potential measures, and 3 broad scale maps, the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, and the local habitat map. And this part of the presentation will take you through each of those in part, starting with the principles and vision. So the first 4 of the principles may be familiar to you because they are based on the Lawton principles of better, bigger, more and joined up. So what we want to see is through the delivery of the priorities, or through focusing our priorities and the delivery of our actions, we want to see, first of all, the quality of our existing habitats improved and bringing them into a much healthier state, so that effectively we are better looking after what we already have. We then move to increasing the size of these habitats and looking to expand and extend our most valuable and important habitat sites in the county. Then we look to establish new nature-rich sites, and that's not only to provide more space for nature, but also to help deliver on the 4th principle, which is joining up our sites and making sure that connections are there between all of our key sites, and making sure just generally that the landscape is one that wildlife can now move across, because we know that for nature recovery to be successful, that we need to provide the ability for our wildlife to respond and adapt to not just a changing climate, but also the other pressures and impacts that come from human intervention, and a joined up landscape makes that a lot easier for them to do that. In addition to the 4 Lawton principles, we've also added on the principle that we should be always trying to maximise the opportunities of nature-based solutions to tackle some of the challenges that our county faces, and also put in the role of landowners, land managers and farmers right at the core of this work in helping us to deliver a better, more coherent and resilient wildlife network. And I know there's many of you already doing that, and it's just about giving landowners, land managers and farmers the recognition and that they deserve as part of the solution to nature decline. And essentially what we've aimed to do is where we have identified the potential measures, the actions to deliver against our priorities, these are all designed to deliver against one or more of these 6 principles. So in terms of our vision, when we started reviewing the outcomes that our stakeholders were telling us they wanted to see for nature recovery, there were clear emerging high-level ambitions which centred around broad habitat groupings. So we use those to develop 10 ambitions that together make up the strategy vision. And under each of these sit more specific priorities, and many of those drill down to very specific habitat types. But these broad habitat groupings and ambitions focused on increasing the functional connectivity of high quality habitats, increasing the use of nature-based solutions, land management and land use increasingly delivering nature recovery gains alongside their obviously the requirement to underpin economic and social needs of the county. To put species at the heart of habitat management and any work to restore, extend or create. To restore, connect, extend our species-rich grassland. To safeguard successional habitats from loss and damage. To bring woodland trees and hedgerows under active management and increase the cover and connectivity across the county. To ensure our freshwater habitats are clean, sufficient, healthy, and the associated catchments for those rivers, their functions were properly restored. To ensure that we have nature in our urban environments and that there is a place for nature in the urban environment. And finally, with one of the longest coastlines in the county, we couldn't ignore that. And there's ambition there to secure high functioning, natural and connected coastal habitats. And as you will see, as I sort of breeze through those, there's a lot of words to delve into. But sometimes words, strategic words, mean very little to people. So what we've also done is to support an understanding of what these words really mean. In the summer, we commissioned some artwork to illustrate what our stakeholders told us was what they wanted to see from nature recovery in the county. And arguably, these do illustrate what we're trying to achieve so much better than the many words in the strategy vision. And this artwork will be joining us on the consultation roadshow as we travel around the county. So I would really recommend you to come out and see us, not just have a chat with us, but have a look at the fabulous artwork. But if you're not able to, you can view it online. So sitting under those 10 ambitions as to what we want to achieve for nature are more detailed priorities, which outline the outcome we want to see for nature in Kent and Medway. And in addition to these priorities for nature recovery, there is also a number of priority species that have been identified for action to be focused on. The priorities were developed with stakeholders through a series of workshops, and we basically ended up focusing on the outcomes that tackled the county's most notable pressures and challenges, supported delivery of local and national ambitions, and did so against our most significant, important and at-risk habitats. We ended up with 52 priorities in a strategy, so I'm obviously not going to go through every single one of those today, and I will leave you to have a look at those in your own time. But here are just some examples of the priorities identified under the ambitions of connectivity, for nature-based solutions, for land management, for species-rich grassland and successional habitats, and then for woodland trees and hedgerows, freshwater habitats, the urban environment, and coastal habitats. As I said, in addition to those sort of more habitat-focused priorities, we also identified a number of priority species. This was guided by by a process from Natural England, and it required us to really drill down and identify a small number of species that we should be targeting our action towards. The first stage of selecting the priority species was under Natural England criteria to identify was classed as a long list of rare, threatened and significant species that we had within the county. And that determined that we had just over 1,500 of these. We then went through a process and that brought us down to 141 priority species that we should be focusing on. So these 141 species represent every taxa that we have within the county, and they were selected not only on the basis of their individual need and urgency, but also in consideration of whether action for them would support the recovery of other species associated with the same habitat assemblage. So the hope is that although we have effectively drilled down that 1,500 to just 9% of our rare threatened species in the county, that actually action for those 140 species will bring much wider benefit to all of our vulnerable species within the county. And for each of these priority species, potential measures to support their recovery are identified. And all of this work was overseen, and effectively the species themselves were identified by an advisory group that was made up of over 30 of the county's most notable species experts, and we're indebted to the work that they put in to help us identify this. But alongside that consideration of the selection of the species to also represent others that's associated with similar habitats, we've also included in the strategy a priority to make sure that whenever any action is designed for habitat recovery or nature recovery, that the species that are associated with that particular habitat are the list is consulted and provisions for them are considered within the works. So sitting under each of those 52 priorities are a number of potential measures, and these essentially are the proposed action to deliver the priority. And the idea of this is it's suggested this is what, if we do this, we will achieve the priority that is set out. Now, obviously, if we've got 52 priorities and 3 or 4 potential measures for each, you could imagine how many potential measures we also have. So again, I'm not going to take you through them all, but I'm just going to give you an example of how they look within the strategy. So within the strategy, every priority has its associated potential measures listed, denoting which of the strategy principles they deliver on. So in this case, we have a potential measure that delivers against better, a measure that delivers against more, and a measure that delivers against connected. In some instances, supporting measures that may be needed are also presented. This example doesn't have any, but examples from other priorities include increasing the number of local tree nurseries, increasing awareness and understanding of scrub habitats, and reducing demand for water through increasing water efficiency measures. So these are all measures that our stakeholders told us were really fundamental to ensuring we're in place so that the wider priority and the other potential measures, the actual habitat specific measures, could be achieved. But because they sit outside of the scope of the local nature recovery strategy, we're not actually able to include them as a specific action within the strategy. But we felt it was really important for them to be set out so that we as a county are reminded what we might need to coordinate and work together on to ensure that the priority is a success and it is delivered to the best of our abilities. The same applies to additional information needs. So again, these are not within the delivery scope of the local nature recovery strategy, but again are presented. And these are particularly important when it comes to addressing data and evidence needs that might be needed before the next review and strategy. So many of these have been items that we identified that if we had this information or a better understanding, we'd have been in a better position in terms of mapping the delivery of that potential measure. And then finally, within the table, we also list the relevant priority species for that habitat. In the measures table, any measure that has a reference number to it, so in this case we have GL 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, any measure that has a reference number indicates a measure that has been mapped, and that's a map that you can view via the online mapping tool using that reference number. And I'll demonstrate that in a third part. So the next stage of the work was to then map those potential measures and target them to where they will deliver the best gains, the widest benefits, and also support nature-based solutions. More detail of how we went about that is provided in the strategy and appendices. But in brief, the way in which we approached it was, first of all, we reviewed the data and evidence that would be required to inform and define the mapping of each potential measure. And this allowed us to determine if that measure could indeed be mapped and whether there was sufficient information to enable targeted mapping of it, so identifying where it was most needed and where the action would be most beneficial. And because in some cases we did not have sufficient data and knowledge, we weren't able to map those. And in some cases, we just couldn't undertake the mapping approach within the scope of the project because it was costly or too time consuming. The initial approach of only mapping those measures that could be sufficiently refined and use them to define and devise the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. So essentially using those measures to identify opportunities for nature recovery in a county meant that some areas of the county appeared from the mapping to have no potential or importance for nature recovery because there was no areas mapped in them. Obviously, this was not the case and instead represented areas where measures largely related to improving management. And in these cases, there was little on which to prioritise one management area over another. And so it was mapped. Or in some cases, we just didn't have sufficient data to enable the required refinement of that. But when we took these maps to stakeholders, they understandably viewed this as problematic and felt it misrepresented the actual value of these areas to nature recovery. So to address this, we decided that we would map every potential measure that could be mapped. And we would do that even if this only was mapped to the extent of basing opportunity on the existence of the habitat type or basing it on the potential for that habitat type. So that does mean that in some cases, some of the maps have very broad coverage and a lot of the county is covered. But what it does also mean is that no opportunity will be missed. And you can see where in the county the opportunities for particular habitats and their restoration or creation do exist. We then took those maps to our stakeholders, to our partners to review and refine them. And that allowed us, importantly, to ground truth these maps because the maps were done as a desk-based exercise based on assumptions. And obviously that on-the-ground knowledge not only made sure that it was correctly mapped and we hadn't missed anything, but also allowed the stakeholders to advise us on whether that area could be more tightly defined and also whether where that potential measure was suggested was actually deliverable. And then we undertook some further refinement to focus those potential measures on addressing opportunities for tackling wider environmental challenges by nature-based solutions and other benefits such as health and access. So on that latter point, one of the ways in which we did that was that where we were looking, where there was a potential measure to create a habitat and that habitat type was not vulnerable to sort of disturbance or recreational disturbance, then there were times where we looked at where in the county there were particularly areas of low access to green space, and we would target the establishment of those habitats in those areas, so that you will not only delivering a nature recovery action, but also improving access to green space, and also delivering the health benefits that come with that. Within the strategy document, only grouped measures per priority are presented. So here's the example of all the potential measures that have been identified for the priority of coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. So the reason we've done that is because really at an individual level, the maps don't tell you incredible much at that very high level, but this just indicates the opportunity generally for coastal and floodplain grazing marsh in the county. But when you go to the online mapping tool, you can look at the individual measures, and you can also really scrutinise these, because you can go down to a more local level, and I'll demonstrate that later. But here is a demonstration of a potential measure under that same floodplain grazing marsh priority. So after the potential measures mapping, we then come to the three strategic maps for the county. So the first of these is the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, and this maps are national conservation sites, local nature reserves, local wildlife sites, and irreplaceable habitat. And this was mapped as per regulation, so we had no autonomy over what went into this map. This was mapped, and the justification for the areas included in this map was on the basis that these areas represented habitats and sites that were already offered some form of protection or management through either their designation or the local planning system. In terms of irreplaceable habitats, these were based on the definition of irreplaceable habitats used for biodiversity net gain. So in Kent, this mapped ancient woodlands, ancient trees, sand dunes, spartina swards, and lowland fens. The second of the maps was a map we actually devised ourselves rather than being given instructions on how to do it. And these were the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. So these were basically the mapped opportunities and target areas of the strategy. So the approach we took to mapping these was firstly to use the potential measures as a foundation for the opportunity areas. Now, as I said, because we ended up mapping every single potential measure, it was not feasible to use them all because they were not suitably refined. So those potential measures that weren't sufficiently refined, either because they were too widely applicable or because of mapping limitations, were excluded. Largely, this exclusion related to measures that just related to the better and didn't focus on potential measures that led to restoration, creation, or connection. So these were still measures that were included in the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. And as good as our understanding is currently, as most of the grants and funding will relate to restoration, creation, and connection, we feel that this doesn't sort of significantly impact the opportunities for access to funding in the county. We then refined these further by another consideration of nature-based solutions and wider benefits. And then as a final tool for refinement, we applied connectivity modelling. And this placed priority on areas of low species flow, areas where there was a bottleneck to connectivity, and areas where there was a need for buffering or linking existing areas of particular importance. And the rationale for this final refinement on connectivity was that if you think of our better, bigger, more joined up principles as a hierarchy, and our ultimate aim is to get to joined up, then by directing our action into areas where we know we need that join up, then we would achieve that. And just to show you why, so you maybe think, well, why do we need to target areas? Why did we need to cut out some of those potential measures? This map really clearly illustrates that the point by featuring all of the map potential measures. So you can see that the coverage is just too wide and too unrefined and does not help us to identify target areas. What this does show us is what we already know, that everywhere has the potential to be an important area for nature, but the strategies, delivery or development regulations required us to be more focused. So what we end up with is a map of areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity that looks like this. And we have around 38% of the county is covered with potential opportunities. Finally, is the local habitat map. And this is created by combining the areas of particular importance, so our existing areas, with our areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, our opportunity areas. And when these are collected together, they identify within the county the areas of strategic significance. And that is the purpose of the local habitat map. So again, I will outline how we use all those maps to inform nature recovery in the final session. But before I slip onto that, are there any questions in relation to the ambitions of the strategy, its priorities, measures, and how we went about the mapping?
We've got a hand up from Mark. Do you want to go ahead, Mark?
Hi, thank you. Just in terms of the areas with potential for in the potential category, is this consultation process an opportunity to amend or add to those? Because on our land holding in particular, that we've got some habitat which is adjacent triple SI and would look sort of to be a prime example of land which would have potential, and then adjacent field, and that's kind of grey, that's been left out on the map, and then adjacent fields which would have much less potential are in that category. So I guess that the consultation is an opportunity to refine that, but I would be grateful for confirmation.
Yeah, of course. So essentially, as we said, as I said, the mapping was done very much as a desk-based exercise, and of course there will be anomalies that come out as a result of that, depending on where the boundaries are drawn on the data that we used. So absolutely, if you do consider that there is an issue with where those opportunity areas have been mapped, please do let us know. If possible, if you're able to actually provide that digitally, that would be great, but I appreciate that might not be possible for everyone to do. But what we do need, if and I mean you've already given the answer there anyway, but what we do need is an explanation as to how the land you're proposing should be included meets the requirements or meets what we were trying to provide through those areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. So you've already said that it butts land that links to triple SI. So I'm quite surprised that it didn't pick that up anyway, because we were trying to provide buffers around triple SIs and the like. So by all means, yes, please do submit those and we will review. If you can, when you do submit them, if you're happy for us to contact you, that might also be helpful, just so that if we need to really understand the mapping.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
We've got a question in the chat that says, how come the measures don't have quantifying targets?
I think I know I think I saw it was Will that asked that, wasn't it? Because I saw that pop up.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Will. Well, it's a good question. Why don't they? Because we've been told we shouldn't include targets in the strategy. So as I said, the local nature recovery strategy is directed, devised and follows guidance, and we were asked not to include targets.
Interesting. So how you I totally understand that, but well, I get it, but how
don't understand it.
No, I don't understand it. No, because obviously how are you going to measure what's better, and
exactly
how things are going to get better. But I suppose you when you're talking about measures refer more to actions.
Yeah.
And they could be qualified as opposed to quantified. So I suppose that's the rationale behind it.
Yeah, I mean, we did go back a couple of times through Natural England on this matter because, well, as you know, because you've written at least one or two of them in the county, we've always had targets with our biodiversity plans and strategies in the county. So it just felt very odd to us. And I even said, if we don't include targets, we're going to get at least someone who asks about it during a consultation. So thank you for proving me right. But I guess once the strategy is in place, well, one of the problems is at the moment we don't quite know what happens once the strategy is published. So we don't know what role KCC as responsible authority plays in the intervening period between publication and the next review. Now, obviously, within that period, you do need it to be monitored. We do need it to be coordinated, and we need to see what's happening, because how on earth it's going to make it a really big job if we don't do anything in the sort of the period before the review, because then we'll have to collect all that data and evidence quickly. So there obviously will need to be something done. We're just waiting to hear from DEFRA what resources we might have to play with in order to enable that, if any. But I think if we aren't given any instruction and we aren't given any sort of firm steer on what it should be, I don't see why within the county, if we decided that actually alongside this strategy, we wanted to produce if you like, a delivery plan that set in place targets for the priorities in terms of what we wanted to achieve. We effectively already have that in the soon to be made redundant biodiversity strategy, so we could just adopt them across. But I think that's a discussion for post summer 25 when we've published this, and we then collectively as a community and as a county need to discuss, right, we've got this, what I think is a great strategy, but how do we turn it into action, and what do we need to do together to enable that to happen?
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, that's quite helpful. Yeah.
Thanks,
Great,
Will.
thanks. Cheers.
Great, we've got a couple of hands up. Anthony, do you want to go ahead?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Congratulations on all that you've done so far. It's a tremendous achievement, and I know it's incredibly complicated, and it's but anyway, well done. I just really wanted to echo what Mark said earlier, and I'm really heartened by the fact that you say that we still have an opportunity to influence the mapping a little bit, because in connection with Old Park in Canterbury, which is linked to Canterbury Golf Course, and most of it is in SSI, but there are key areas around the edge of that SSI that fall into the second category, and I don't think they've been mapped. I need to look at it more carefully, but I don't think that they have been mapped as areas which could become of particular importance for biodiversity. So we would love to correct that. And we've been working with Kent Wildlife Trust, and in fact, just before Christmas, I heard from them that they've mapped those areas and designated them local wildlife sites. So that's just happened. So I can probably produce something digitally and get it to you, so that you could perhaps have another look at that.
That would be fabulous. Well, so this is something that we do need to take back as a question to Natural England, actually, because obviously the mapping of the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, which included local wildlife sites, that was one of the very first things we did because it was the easiest job in hand. And also it was quite important to set the context for the areas that we were looking at, because arguably the opportunity areas needed to be outside of the areas of particular importance for biodiversity. So that was mapped this time last year. And obviously when we come to the summer in publication stage, whilst some of the sort of more national designated sites, they will are likely to have changed or been extended. There will be some more local areas that will need to be added to that mapping, because certainly there will be changes to either additions, some removals, and some extensions of boundaries to the local wildlife sites. So you might find that it's naturally picked, if they've been designated a local wildlife site, you might find that it's just naturally picked up as part of that process if we allow to update the areas of particular importance for biodiversity before we go to publication. I'm not sure how they will view that, because of we've consulted on it as that map and then we'd be changing it. However, given that that change is based on fact rather than, you know, like the areas that could become of importance, which is more theoretical, I think it should be acceptable. It does raise the question or the issue of the fact that as soon as you put a line down on a map, it's straight away outdated. And the fact that these maps are to remain in place until the next review does raise some issues there, which is why I think these boundaries are defined as not definitive. I think at one point they were even described as a sort of as a bit woolly, but therefore still to need to explain to us what they mean by that. So yes, that's a long, very rambly way of saying yes, please do get in contact. But I think there's a good chance that if those areas have been made a local wildlife site, they will be picked up within the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, and therefore will fall into an area of strategic significance naturally.
Thank you.
Harry, do you want to go ahead? You're on mute, Harry. I don't know if you're trying to take yourself off mute. Oh, we still can't hear you. Oh, can we hear you? We still can't hear you, I'm afraid, Harry. Do you want to keep trying with your technology and we'll go to the next person and we'll come back to you? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Okay.
there you go. Go ahead.
You can. Oh, brilliant. Oh my God, sorry. I can't believe it. You know, Helmy, it's been 6 years of this. I still can't get my technology right. I used to be good at this at one point. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the talk so far. I've just noticed you've got 52 habitat priorities. I don't know where I came up with this idea, but I thought, is there going to be some kind of prioritizing your priorities within that list? Or is that about as far as it gets? Because it seems to be quite broad brush. And I thought part of the function of this was to target very particular areas as being the most important parts. Or how does it compare to other local other plans in different counties?
It's pretty comparable, actually. The ones that have sort of got to this stage, and there aren't many because for various reasons, but those that have are coming out with similar numbers and also coming out with a similar area for the areas that could be of particular importance for biodiversity as opportunity areas. But you're right, some of the measures are very broad, and also when we come to the mapping, when you look at it, there are more than, in some instances, there is more than one priority, more than one potential measure mapped for an area. And in some cases, that means there's more than one priority mapped for an area because some of those potential measures relate to different priorities. That is something that we need to still address to work out either whether we offer a prioritisation for it or we provide guidance for the landowner, if you like, to understand how to prioritise. I actually have a slide on this in the next section, so perhaps I could pause there, come to it, and then we'll have a chat afterwards if that hasn't answered your questions.
No, thank you. No,
perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, one more hand up from Matthew. Do you want to go ahead?
Hi there. I must apologise. I've got a bit of work going on, so if there's a bit of background noise, I can't do anything about it. But I just wanted to add my congratulations to the work you've done so far. I've looked at quite a lot of these around the country, and this is the best I've seen to date, which is really good from your perspective. One of the questions that I want to spread this or good practice or use as an example, because I think that's always beneficial to other responsible authorities, and the thing that sets this strategy apart is the fact that there's multiple overlapping measures, which I really like, because it means that you can make good conservation decisions on the ground depending on the local situation, which obviously you can't with a desk-based process, you can't all really make those decisions. And it also avoids the sort of perverse incentive of unit farming, which we're really worried about in terms of inappropriate solutions to conservation situations that don't take into account all the things you normally would, like topography, hydrology, etc. So that's a really good practice. The feedback we've been getting from other local authorities is that either DEFRA or Natural England have been insistent that there should only be one measure for one area or wherever possible. And how, so my question really is, how have you received much pushback from Natural England or DEFRA about your strategy of multiple overlapping measures rather than one for every specific area?
That's well, first of all, thank you very much for that feedback. It's really lovely. And the even nicer thing was I was waiting for the but. So that's really lovely that there wasn't a but after the really positive feedback. So thank you. Yes, we have received feedback, which is why, like I just said, why we do have that requirement to look at how we prioritise. Our pushback to Natural England DEFRA on it has been for exactly the reasons you've just said, is that this is a desk-based exercise. We have no idea what the ground conditions are really like. We have no idea what the quality is like. So it could be that you get down there and actually one of the measures that identifies something relating to better isn't needed because actually the management's already in place. So then you can move to the next. So I do, like I say, have a slide on this, so I'll come to it in a bit more detail. But the other reason that we've said to them, so there's a number of reasons we've pushed back. One is the fact that, like you say, you don't know what the conditions are on site. The second one is that, going back to that point of if we choose one opportunity over another, it might be that you then end up with areas of the county with nothing in it. The stakeholders get really upset by the seeming lack of opportunity when it isn't. So I think the fact that the reason we've ended up with so many measures is because, for one area, is because we decided to map every potential measure. That came from stakeholders. That was a desire from stakeholders. So that really helped our case when taking it to Natural England, because Natural England DEFRA have obviously told us this needs to be a strategy designed with the people, for the people. So the fact that they were so insistent on that, I mean, trust me, if you'd been in that workshop, you would have, if DEFRA had been in that workshop, they would have gone like, yep, okay, no problem. There was, our stakeholders were very insistent that we needed to map every opportunity. So there's that. There's also the fact that if you only put one opportunity down, and that is that potential measure is something that, say, that landowner is not interested in delivering on their land, then you could potentially miss out on all the other opportunities that have been identified there that are something that the landowner is interested in delivering. So aside from the condition and the ability to deliver on that measure, there's also just the general desire. And then also the other reason that we've sort of promoted this more than one potential measure is, if you're looking at land parcels or individual land parcels, yes, you might just want to focus on one potential measure, but we're trying to encourage landscape scale restoration here. So we need to include a multitude of different measures so that we end up with that mosaic of habitats that we need at a landscape scale to support nature recovery. If we just ended up with one particular habitat in a larger area, then that's not going to do anything to help nature either. So we felt that the mapping of all of our potential measures, regardless of where they came, just provided the flexibility to deliver nature recovery that we need within the county. So, and Natural England seem to have accepted that, with the exception of the fact that they have asked us to do more work on between now and publication on that will help a landowner or whoever is looking at the map to understand which one do they start from. Because I guess what you said is quite right, but if you have a landowner who's, say, particularly new to this or particularly fresh and goes in and sees a load of potential measures on one piece of land, it could be quite bewildering as to understanding, what do I do? So we will need to offer some guidance to help an individual understand and to help them navigate those options. Does that answer it at all? Sorry, I think I've just rambled on a bit there.
No, that's really good. And if it's, well, it would be really helpful to me to sort of offer that encouragement to other responsible authorities and maybe put them in touch with you, because a lot of them haven't got the confidence to implement the approach that you're talking about, which is the correct approach. And knowing that somebody else is doing it will be really helpful for them. Yeah, particularly absolutely. Because they're intimidated by Natural England saying just one measure for one area.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, we might even come to a point where I don't know whether also for us, because we've got such a large area, but I mean, that is a task in itself to look at where we've got overlap in potential measures and identify which of those is the right potential measure with any confidence. You know, that's a massive task, and we could end up by pushing and rushing through that, making huge mistakes in terms of what is the right potential measure, because we can't go out and ground truth the whole of the county.
And then it's set for 5 years or however long the review period is. I've seen situations where you've got south-facing chalk slopes which have been designated as linking ancient woodland with scrub or with tree planting, and it's patently not the right option for the site. So that's what we want to avoid.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you're welcome to get in contact with us again in about, so I would hope we're using sort of now and publication stage to work out a way in which we can sort of do that prioritization. I've also got, like I said, I've got a slide list which is setting out our thinking anyway, but perhaps also I might be able to pick your brains over the coming months as to how you think we could safely suggest not priorities but how you might prioritize, and it would be really helpful to get your input on that actually.
Yeah, please do. As I said, we're looking at lots of them around the country at the moment, so we want to help them be as good as they possibly can be. So sharing good practice is you know, something we want to do.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, Rachel, unless there's any other burning questions, I think probably should get on, because this last section needs. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for those questions. It's really interesting how each time we talk to a different sector, different questions come up. So I'm glad we did do this on a sector basis, because it does mean that we're getting to the real nub of some of the details. Okay, so this last session is a look at how the local nature recovery strategy will be used to inform and influence nature recovery in the county. A lot of it is based on the maps and the targeting nature of the maps. I should just put a little caveat in here that a lot of this is based on the limited information we know as to how the local nature recovery strategy is going to officially influence not just action, but also funding and investment. So, you know, this may change. We are still awaiting a plethora of guidance and sort of mechanisms and the like from DEFRA as to how this will all work in practice. But I think we have, where I'm making assessments or assumptions, I will highlight these. So hopefully I'm not going to be leading you down a dark alley. So key to understanding where all these priorities and potential measures are going to be delivered in the county is the maps. And at the moment, we're presenting these on an online mapping tool. And when it's published, they will also be presented on an online mapping tool. I will just say that this online mapping tool is relatively basic in its functionality. The reason we've not gone down a very detailed route is because we don't yet know specifically how the LNRS is going to be used for various functions in terms of planning and informing funding and grants. We didn't want to develop something now that didn't have the functionality that we find is actually needed when we come to publication in the summer, because obviously development of any tool like this costs money and time, and we have a limited budget from DEFRA for all of this. So we've kept it, I mean, I say it's simple. I'm sure Kent Wildlife Trust, who've done all of our mapping, have been fabulous in doing the mapping for us and producing this tool, would really balk at me describing it as simple. But when I say that, I mean it perhaps won't do everything that you would want an online mapping tool to do at the moment, but hopefully there's sufficient functionality in it to allow you to look and delve into the detail. Consequently, we're not taking the consultation isn't asking any questions on the actual mapping tool itself. But over the next sort of 6 months, while we're developing in the background the published tool, we will be coming out to many of you to say what is it that you would like to see on the tool, so that we can, within the best of our abilities, both capabilities and resource-wise, we can make it a tool that works for all. So when you first launch the mapping tool, you'll be presented with this screen, and you just sort of read through the details and click the OK button, and you'll be brought to the map interface. And if you select the layers menu at the top there, that will drop that down, and then you're presented with a number of different information and mapping functions as well that you can select. So first of all, you can choose your preferred baseline map. So at the moment, we have the options of street map, grayscale, or satellite imagery. And the default for that is always street map, which is what's currently shown. And then you can also pull up the features of the district boundaries. You can have the district labels on there, and you can also view the rivers network. And that, again, all of those are turned on as a default. And if you want them on or off, you just click or tick, so you can switch them on and off as you want. And you can switch them on and off as you're looking at the map as well. Also, from this page, you can see that there's a little table to the left-hand side. By clicking on that, that will bring up all the information about the mapped measures. So when you click on the right-hand side there, you've got the priority groupings for the measures. When you click on that and you get the drop-down box, all you will see is the reference number for the potential measure. The reason being that most of our potential measures are very wordy, and if we included them in the menu on that side, that page would go on and on and on and on. So we've just used the reference numbers. So if at any time you want to remind yourself the specifics of that potential measure, you just click on that table there, and it brings up a table which I'll show you in a minute. And finally, also on the left-hand side are the zoom functions, so plus and minus, and you can also use the wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out on the map. So if you do want to know what a potential measure reference relates to, you click on that table button, and then that will bring up this measures table, and you just pop the reference number in the search box under potmess ref, and then that will bring up all the details for that particular reference, and it will tell you what the measure is, whether it was used to inform the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, and also includes a brief description on the mapping methodology. So when you're looking at it, you can understand why it might look like it looks. And more detail on the mapping methods and the data sources can be found in the strategy appendices, but we just provide here a very short summary. I should just say that with the maps, there is a lot of information that sits under the maps to create them. So sometimes it can take a bit of a time to upload and to load. Shouldn't take more than, depending on your internet speeds and your computer specifications, it can be instant. It could take a few seconds. It certainly shouldn't be more than 2 minutes. So if you find that is happening, try refreshing. And if you do continue to find problems, then do let us know. But to date, it seems to be working well for everyone. But because of the potential for it to take a bit of a time and to lag, I'm not doing a demonstration with the live tool today, as you may have guessed. So looking at how we might use the local nature recovery strategy and the maps to direct nature, one of the first purposes of the strategy is directing action for nature. So it identifies what the action is required for nature recovery in Kent and Medway. And then the mapping, as I said, indicates all the areas where these potential measures could be delivered. In some cases, these are wide-ranging areas, as I said, where we've not been able to really refine it. But in others, we have managed to really focus down and go to specific areas, depending on how able we were to drill that down to target areas. But in all cases, regardless of whether they're sort of broad coverage across the whole county or very specific areas, it's indicative. Some of the management measures are there to increase functionality or biodiversity. So sometimes in some of the cases where we've mapped management measures, they have been mapped to a specific area. In some, they're just broad coverage. Now, of course, in some areas, if it has been mapped to a specific area, it might indicate that mapping, that management's not needed elsewhere. That's not the case. It's just that we have been able to identify where general management will deliver the greatest gains, or where it's most needed. But it's really important to remember that the introduction of any management, as long as it's appropriate and sort of the right management in the right place, right time, right reason sort of approach, will deliver benefits wherever it's applied. So just because it's not mapped doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered. Management is so important, and as our stats showed from the State of Nature in Kent report, that we are seeing our conservation areas becoming less frequently managed. So any introduction of management is a positive thing. The strategic nature of this document also means that some measures may not be relevant or appropriate when considered in detail at the local level. So it's really important to appreciate that just because this has been indicated on the map doesn't mean that when you get down to the local level that it's just blanketly and blindly applied. It also is important to note that just because a potential measure is not considered strategically important at a county scale does not mean that when you look at it on a more district or even more localised level that it's not important. So exclusion from the mapping does not indicate that that action is not applicable at the local level. Again, it's just that it's not considered strategically valuable when considered at the county level. And going back to the point that some measures may not be relevant or appropriate, it's therefore really important that because this was a desk-based approach, that we consider the site before commencing any actual works that will deliver that action. So site assessments will still be required, and also the potential measures mapping does not exclude the need for any other permissions and prerequisites. All the mapping is indicative, and all the normal processes that you would put in place before undertaking any action is still required, whether it's mapped or not. And as I said, the strategy and associated maps do not only do not also not say you can just do this, but they also don't instruct their implementation or dictate the action to happen there. So on the one hand, you might not see something mapped there. That doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It's just not considered a strategic priority area. But also where it is mapped, that doesn't mean that you are impelled to do it. They are simply there as a guide for how landowners and managers could use or manage the land or approach operations in a way that supports the recovery of nature. So all of this is indicative and is suggested as opposed to dictated. So we've had recently some advice. I'm not sure it really goes beyond much that we previously understood, but we did have some advice from DEFRA on how action for nature recovery would be directed by the local nature recovery strategy for farmers and land managers. So this stated that it would provide information to help in the selection of which countryside stewardship and SFI options were appropriate for their land. In terms of farmer clusters, it would help groups of farmers and land managers to shape nature recovery priorities for a broader area, and hopefully would encourage collaboration across holdings and landscapes. It will identify opportunities for landscape recovery project proposals and provides evidence to support applications for that, and also information for project development. And finally, it will help government in considering the applications for funding and the LNRS will be used as a criteria in certain applications. DEFRA have also set out some other potential future uses. So these are just possible uses that DEFRA say require further exploration before they are introduced, but potentially these could be identifying where funding could be made available to encourage farmers and land managers in terms of taking the most impactful actions on land. It could be a criteria for future government nature recovery funding schemes, so that essentially any action that is proposed in a strategy would be eligible for funding. I mean, that would be fabulous, wouldn't it, if they do bring that in. Inform private companies where they should be directing their investment for habitat creation and enhancement projects, and also potentially a role in guiding the markets that relate to nature and carbon. So there are some additional potential roles that we might see coming online. The one thing we don't know in any of this is the mechanisms by which that will all link together. So if you were to want to have a look at where potential measures might fall within the county, and particularly as a farmer or landowner, you might want to understand where that falls on your land. You can use the mapping tool. So you can see from this where that potential measure has been targeted. Now, you first of all may already know the particular measure or priority reference that you're interested in, because you've trawled through the strategy document and you've noted all the potential measures that you are interested in potentially assisting with on the land you own or manage. But if you don't know the specific measure that you're interested in and are just looking for any measure or priority that relates to a specific habitat type, you can use the table to identify these. So first of all, you would launch the table by clicking the little arrow table on the left-hand side. And then in the table that comes up, you pop in the habitat type you're interested in. So in this case, I've popped in grazing marsh. And when you click it in, what comes up is all of the measures that relate, all the mapped measures, that is, that relate to grazing marsh. So you can see here of the 128 maps that exist, 3 of them relate to potential measures on grazing marsh. So then what you would do is you would either note down all of those, or just the particular one that you're interested in, the potential measure reference, and then you would close the box, go to the mapping tool and select, in this case I've chosen 2.2, select the potential measure that's of particular interest to you. And what will happen is it will bring up, not always instantly, as I said, because it does take a time to load sometimes, but it will bring up all of the areas where that potential measure has been identified, an opportunity has been identified to exist for that measure. And using the plus and minus keys, you can also scan in and out to see exactly where that is. So you don't have to look at it at a county scale, you can go right down to the local level. A second purpose of the strategy is donating the areas of strategic significance. So that's denoted by the local habitat map, which comprises the areas of particular importance for biodiversity and areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. So where a potential measure falls within an area that could become of particular importance for biodiversity, this indicates that that potential measure is within an area of strategic significance. So if land falls in the area and the action aligns with the potential measures identified, this might be classed as strategically significant for any grant, funding or investment scheme using this as an indicator. So this is really us thinking about how it would work. Like I said, in terms of, we know that government and others are planning on using the LNRS as a criteria for funding. And we envisage, because it kind of makes sense, that is how it would be used. But of course, that's really just our assumptions. The one area where we do have a bit more understanding how strategic significance comes into play is with biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain is a mandatory requirement that aims to make sure that development has a measurably positive impact on biodiversity. And that gain is calculated through the use of a standard metric, which identifies the biodiversity value of the land loss and then the value of the biodiversity gained. And the metric includes a multiplier, that a strategic significance multiplier that is related to the local habitat map and the potential measures that fall within it. Now, there's debates about how valuable biodiversity gain is. My personal feeling is it is, and any gain is a gain. But actually, biodiversity net gain will be more meaningful in terms of nature recovery if those gains are not just done as a tick box exercise, but if those gains are situated in areas of the greatest need and also deliver on what is needed, the action required. So this is something that has been embedded into the metric and therefore high strategic significance will be applied when the habitat parcel is located in an area proposed to help deliver the LNRS priorities, so an area of strategic significance, and the intervention is consistent with the potential measures that are proposed for that location. And I'll show you how you will identify that on the map in a second. The areas of strategic significance denoted by the strategy do not indicate areas where development should be excluded. And they also do not dictate action, nor do they place limitations on how the land should be used. So they are not there as a restrictor or prevention tool. And in the absence of the guidance that is expected imminently on the role of local nature recovery strategies in plan making, we are not expecting that local plans and policies will be revised to reference the strategy. So where local plans and policies are already in place, there will not be any sort of retrospective referencing to the strategy. However, there still will be a requirement for planning authorities to have regard to and take account of the strategy when they're applying their local plans in planning decisions. And in time, because local planning authorities, because there is a statutory requirement on them to consider and take account of the local nature recovery strategy, as these plans are revised and updated, the LNRS will be a really important source of spatial information to inform that land use planning and ensure that nature and opportunities for its recovery are not only considered, but embedded, hopefully, within our local plans. So if you want to view the areas of strategic significance, on the mapping tool currently, we don't have an individual layer for this. We ask you to do the work. So you would basically, in order to view it, you click on the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity layer and the areas of particular importance for biodiversity mapping layer, and you will be given a map that looks like this. And essentially anything that is coloured in either yellow or green is in an area of strategic significance. The yellow is effectively the opportunity areas, and the green is the areas that are considered to have some form of protection and or management already in place through the designations they have. If you're then wanting to understand whether a potential measure falls into an area of strategic significance to determine either whether it might be eligible for grants or funding, or whether if you're looking to deliver biodiversity net gain units, whether it could get the strategic multiplier. Firstly, what you do is you select the measure you want to view. So in this case, it is going back to that coastal grazing marsh, coastal and floodplain grazing marsh potential measure. So you click on that, that will bring it up, and then you just overlay that with both the areas of particular importance for biodiversity and areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. And you will get this beautiful coloured map viewing. And what this shows is where there is dark green or orange, these are areas where the potential measure falls into an area of strategic significance. So if you were delivering the potential measure in that area, you could class your action as an action of strategic significance, and you could incorporate that into your biodiversity net gain metric calculations. If the area you're interested in remains blue, as is shown here, then whilst that is an opportunity still identified as a great opportunity for that delivery of that action, it has not been classed as being in an area of strategic significance. So you would not be eligible for any uplift that comes from that. Also on the map, you'll see that there are some lighter green and yellow areas. These are basically the areas where there are areas of particular importance for biodiversity or could become of importance for biodiversity, but where that potential measure doesn't exist or it hasn't been identified for. So really what you're looking at is the parts of the map you're interested in is the dark green and orange, because then you know your measure falls into an area of strategic significance, or the blue, which shows you that that area has been identified as an opportunity for that measure. It just doesn't fall into an area of strategic significance. But that's not to say that it would not be valuable delivering it there. You just won't benefit from any of the uplifts. For one reason or another, you might want to view the potential measure just within the APIB or the ASIB layer. So really easy to do that. You just follow exactly the same process, but you only select one of the local habitat map makeup areas rather than both. And then it's exactly the same thing in terms of dark green if it's a potential measure that falls within an existing area, and orange if it is a potential measure that falls into an area of opportunity. So just to quickly, I'm conscious that we're now at 10:30. I still have a few more slides. Just to talk through some of the other aspects of how the LNRS will work in practice. Bear with me, take a sip. So once the strategy is published, hopefully summer this year, after that point, the strategies areas planning authorities, when they are undertaking a new review or development of their local plan or minerals and waste plan or neighbourhood plan, they will need to take account of the local nature recovery strategy. And as I said, that does present a really important and influential role in that. We don't have that guidance exactly how that will work in the local planning context, but we're not expecting, as I said, that the strategy to be applied retrospectively to any existing plans, and certainly not supersede any land decisions already taken, including allocated sites. And that not only applies to plans that are already in place, but those areas, plans where revisions are already a long way down the line as well, because obviously a local plan review process it takes quite a few years. The strategy is not designed as a tool to prevent development, nor do the identified areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity preclude development. So whereas there are restrictions within the areas of particular importance for biodiversity that come through legislation and local planning, there's nothing of the like for the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. But as I said, there is the opportunity through the strategy to inform future local plans, and through biodiversity net gain, through both those ways, it's hoped that the nature recovery strategy can guide development to maximise positive outcomes for nature. And just sort of a quick recap of what I said earlier in response to the question. We do have more than one potential measure identified in a location in some cases, and this ensures that no opportunity for nature recovery is missed, and that broad areas do consider a range of habitats and give that mosaic of habitats that we know nature needs, not just to recover, but also we know that it needs the mosaic of habitats to respond to a changing climate and all the other pressures that come from human interventions on the land. We do need to undertake some further work to decide how we give a better steer on the priorities for the published strategy, and these we envisage these being based on the application of the strategy principles. So effectively, if you have a number of actions and you haven't, through your sort of on the ground assessment of that, you still have not been able to identify which of those actions is most appropriate. So if on the ground assessment one doesn't spring out as the most appropriate, which is unlikely, but let's just say it is, we then envisaged that you could apply the hierarchy of principles to prioritise the action. So you would first start with better, putting in place and ensuring that there was appropriate management that was there, not just to get the quality there, but to maintain the quality of that habitat. Then you would go to any bigger potential measures and build on what is already there and buffer what is already there. Where there is not that opportunity to extend and buffer, you would then move to more and establish new habitats. And then finally, the feeling is that by applying all of these three in that order within the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, again, it brings us back to the fact that we will enable this final principle of join up by focusing the actions of better, bigger, more in the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. We'll also be having a look as well at how we can consider or use the consideration of our priority species to also prioritise which measure might be more appropriate. So that's particularly the case in the creation of habitat. So where you might be restoring or creating habitat, particularly over a large scale, selecting one habitat over another might be the appropriate way to go, because it will help you deliver against one of the priority species. But as you can imagine, and as I alluded to when we were discussing it earlier, identifying that for every single part of the county where a potential measure is identified is a mammoth task, and perhaps one that is best done in real time as opposed to within the confines of the published strategy. And we will be further discussing that with DEFRA and Natural England. So one of the things that we hear quite a lot is how the local nature recovery strategy will protect nature. How does it protect? And we have to remind people that this is a strategy that provides a framework for action. It identifies what action's needed for nature recovery and where it's most needed and where it will deliver the greatest gains. The strategy itself does not offer any formal or otherwise protection, and that can only be provided through statutory designations or local planning policy. So the only place in which protection is provided for nature is in already existing areas of designations and where local planning policy applies. Of course, local planning authorities, as they are developing their local plans, may choose to use the strategy to help identify land that could be set aside for the purposes of nature recovery, but there's no requirement on them to do so, although it would help them to demonstrate achievement against their biodiversity duty. But the biodiversity duty is not specific in terms of what they need to do, but it would show a real commitment to their local nature. And so whilst they're not required to do it, there's no legal requirement, it will be something that we will be discussing with our local planning authorities when they come to planning revisions, although obviously with the current proposals for devolution, who knows where any of that is going at the moment. One other way in which it may inform protection rather than deliver protection is that there is a potential role in delivering the 30 by 30 commitment. So our understanding is that the government might look at the local nature recovery strategies in terms of informing the identification of areas that could potentially contribute to the government's 30 by 30 commitment, that being to effectively conserve and manage 30% of England's land and seas by 2030, so that there is a potential role for it there. But regardless of all these opportunities, it's just a reminder that no element of the mapping should be viewed as some level of protection, nor should it be viewed as some sort of mechanism to prevent things either. So that concludes the overview. But before I finish, I'd like to just use this quote from the wonderful Sir David Attenborough to remind us of why such a strategy and the ownership and delivery of it together is so important. And it also allows me to just say why it's so important that we hear your views on the strategy, so that we can ensure it is something that you not only endorse, but also feel happy to adopt it in the delivery of any action you might be taking for nature recovery. And just a note that in terms of the consultation response questionnaire, the strategy itself is very long and includes various parts, and consequently the questionnaire appears very long and unwieldy. But please don't be put off by this, because you do not have to answer all the questions, and there is the opportunity to just skip through as you work through it. So please do not be put off by what might appear an initially very long questionnaire. You are more than welcome to only answer the questions you want to. And that brings me to the end. Right. Any further questions? I'm conscious we've run over by 10 minutes, so apologies, but I do have time to stay on and answer any questions if you're happy to do that yourself.
There's a question in the chat, Liz, that says, can I clarify that if a site falls in the ASIB layer or APIB and the measure is consistent with habitat changes proposed, the SS baseline is recorded as low?
Say that again, sorry. The SS baseline is recorded as...
Matthew, do you want to come in and say it in person? It'll probably be better. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just thought I'd throw some things in at the end. Yeah, so in the guidance, in the government guidance, it states that the if your site is recorded within the the ASIP layer or APIB layer, then its strategic significance should be recorded as low in correspondence to any measures that you're trying to apply to create uplift on that land. But it wasn't clear from the document whether that was the case. So I just wanted to clarify that if you have a site and you want to improve it and it falls in the in one of those layers and it's got existing value, say for example it could be a site, say a lowland meadow for example, in poor condition, and you want to increase its value to good condition, that lowland meadow should then start with its strategic significance as low, and which then enhance to high. That's what the guidance says. I just wondered whether that's the case in this strategy.
That is my understanding. So in terms of our strategy, we KCC as the authors of this are not determining how the strategy is used. So yeah, you would just follow whatever the guidance states as that. Yeah,
it might be worth a note in that, because just to help people in that regard, because it was something that I've noticed, so other people will, I'm sure.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I did have another one. Sorry.
Yeah, go on, fire away.
I'm hogging it rather.
No, you're right.
Yeah, so just a request really. So asking whether the description of the measure can appear alongside the reference number in the layers section. Otherwise, you have to jump from the main strategy document back to find out what your layers are. And another note on that is that when you add another layer, it zooms all the way out to the whole picture rather than staying on the site that you're focusing on.
Yeah, so these are the sorts of functionalities that we'll look to build in to the final online mapping tool. Like I said, we've done a very basic tool. The issue is with having the potential measures listed alongside the reference number is that menu would be pages and pages long because of all of the words that are used for the potential measures. Any strategy writer never likes to be short on words. They always like to put lots of words in. I think there is a way in which we could possibly so when you are online, you can use the table to the left hand side to bring up without you having to leave that platform. You can just use the table and that will bring up all the potential measure reference numbers and details. So you can just you can sort of use that as a reference tool rather than having to flip between the actual strategy document, which is obviously quite long and unwieldy. So that makes it a little bit easier. But I think what we will at least do is see if we can somehow sort of paraphrase the potential measure so that at least a bit more understanding of it is available when you are clicking on it as a layer. That's something we'll need to look at. The other thing as well that we're hoping to do is that you potentially don't have to click the layer unless you want to look at the layer. What we're hoping we might be able to do is that you would be able to hover over the land you're interested in and it brings up all the potential measures that have been identified for that land. That would, I think, make the tool a lot more usable for the majority. But obviously we would still have the function that you could search more broadly for the potential measures as well. But yeah, those are all things that we need to pick up as part of the super duper mapping tool that we need to make available online.
There are numbers that do that actually. When you hover over the site, it will then pop up all the measures that are applicable to it. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Anything else, Rachel?
I think that's all for now.
Liz, it's Alexa. There's another question in the chat from Anthony Weston about lowland meadows and the mapping. Anthony, I don't know whether might just have been an issue with loading, not being able to see them, saying can see orange and green and orange when loading GL3 lowland meadow within the ASIB and APIB layers. I think maybe you mean you can't see it. I don't know.
Exactly. Sorry. Yes, exactly. I can't see it now. I don't know whether that's loading or just user error as I start to get to grips with it, but I couldn't see or whether there isn't any strategically significant lowland meadow identified. But I think also just on, I suppose, echoing some of Matthew's points, because there isn't a legend, what Liz took us through just now in terms of using the colours to highlight those areas becomes, or I can't obviously see a legend, becomes quite tricky, and I'll have to screenshot your description, Liz, as what we're looking for in terms of those strategically identified areas.
Yes, no, that's a really good point. We have not. Yes, that might be something we can actually add on. I will have a look, but certainly we will make sure that goes onto the final tool.
Great, thank you.
Can't believe we didn't spot that. It just shows you, doesn't it? You can look at something for months and months on end and not spot something as obvious as a missing legend. Thank you for that. Is that it then, Rachel?
Yep, I think
No
we're all
hands
good
up?
now. No more hands up.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact us. We do have online, there is a frequently asked questions section, and we are building on that and working on that pretty much every day as someone asks us a question that we haven't yet thought of. And so if you do have a question, please could I ask you to refer first to the FAQs online, and if then there isn't an answer to the question you want, please drop us a line via email. We are touring up and down the county, so if you did want to come out and actually speak to a person, that would be lovely. Please come and keep us company as we tour the county. So those, again, all of those dates are online. And I will circulate oh, my brain's just gone dead now. I will circulate the presentation and the recording, which you are welcome to share with colleagues who might be interested to catch up on it. And also included in that will be all the relevant links to the FAQs, the events, etc. And also, if any of you, whether any of you are in farmers clusters or in other meetings or groups, that you think it would be useful for us to come along and not necessarily do the long presentation you've had today, but just give an overview and have an informal chat, we very welcome those invites. So do give us a shout. But for now, I will say thank you very much and goodbye.